What is up, everybody? It is Friday afternoon, I guess early evening for some. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast, and we are happy to be talking some NFL draft, Bengals football, etc. with you right now. I'm Anthony. He is John. John, what's going on, bud?
Nothing much, man. It's finally hot out. I was out doing errands, catching some vitamin D, and I just want the draft to be here. It always feels like it goes on for like a week too long, the wait that is. But I guess the best thing is it's not like the very last week of April or like when it was in May, like 11 years ago. That was just a killer wait. But it always feels like it's just a little bit too long of a wait, but we're nearly there.
We are nearly there, and I will be there. It is
Let's
confirmed. Go. I'm going to be there. So that'll be a lot of fun covering that for this show, Cincy Jungle. And I have never been to Green Bay. So the logistics from Southern California to Green Bay, John Sheeran, are interesting, to say the least. But I have a friend out there, so I'll be an old high school friend. So I get to see him, which is awesome. He always comes back to our neck of the woods. So that'll be part of the festivities. But I will be there for the first two nights. Last time when I went to Vegas, I was only there for the first night, so I'll get to stay there for the first two nights, and then covering, hopefully get some cool interviews and behind the scenes stuff. So you'll want to check that out on cincyjungle.com on our site. John, if they'll let you, if you want to put some stuff up on A to Z Sports, you're more than welcome to. And of course, all of it's going to be on the Believe in Cincy channel, podcast channel as well, iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Google. I don't even think Google exists anymore, does it? I don't know. We're there along with a couple of other shows, Talking Football with Bengal Jim and Friends. Right now in the off season, they are streaming live Sunday, so you want to check that out when you are able. And then of course, we're on Cincy Jungle's Facebook page, all that kind of stuff. So check it out. All right. We've got a few things on tap today. And one of which I don't even think we've done a mock draft to date yet, at least through a simulator. So we'll get to that a little later. We also will be breaking out the old wheel again, this time for offensive linemen, and we'll test our knowledge that way and hopefully get you some mini profiles on a number of different guys. We had fun with that last week with the defensive linemen. We had 4 or 5 really good profiles, and all of those we've separated and put on our YouTube channel and different posts that have either been posted on Cincy Jungle or will be posted. So keep an eye out for those. But before we do all of that, John Sheeran, let's do a rundown, I think, of some of the visits that the Bengals have been conducting. We went over some of that, namely with the Ohio State players that, were heavy because of the local affiliation, et cetera. But you have a comprehensive list, and just keeping it all together at A to Z, buddy. You are on top of it. Let's bring this up. Hopefully people can kind of see that, but I don't know, kick us off. Run us down with some interesting names here that the Bengals have been meeting with in the pre-draft process.
Yeah, just so we can get the audio audience involved here, I'm just going to run through the names of every 30 or local visit that has been officially or unofficially reported for the Bengals. It's not going to be 30 names here because some of these visits do actually go unreported and we don't hear about it until after the draft. But the ones that we know so far are Oklahoma State linebacker Nicholas Martin, Oregon offensive lineman Josh Connerly Jr., Ohio State defensive end Jack Sawyer, Minnesota offensive tackle Ariante Ursary, William & Mary offensive tackle Charles Grant, South Carolina safety Nikki Minwari. We got Ole Miss defensive tackle Walter Nolan, Ohio State defensive tackle Ty Hamilton, Ohio State running back Travion Henderson, Ohio State running back Quinshon Judkins, Tennessee edge defender James Pierce Jr., Arizona offensive lineman Jova Savanaya. Oh my God, I practiced this name so freaking much.
Savanaya, is that right?
I will confirm later on, but I've folded under pressure, of course. Defensive tackle from Tennessee, Omar Norman Lott, Marshall safety J.J. Roberts, Nebraska defensive tackle Ty Robinson, Nebraska center Ben Scott, Iowa running back Caleb Johnson, Ohio State offensive lineman Josh Simmons, South Carolina defensive tackle T.J. Sanders, Miami offensive lineman Jalen Rivers, Toledo defensive tackle Darius Alexander. We did a profile of him last week. Go check that out. Montana State quarterback, offensive weapon Tommy Mallet, and Louisiana State LSU offensive lineman Emory Jones Jr. There are some themes here, Anthony, and it's about really just 2 position groups specifically that have dominated these visits. Offensive linemen, defensive linemen, specifically defensive tackles. It's not a guarantee that when a player comes into Cincinnati, he will be drafted. But more times than not, the Bengals draft players that they conducted visits for. And if you want to take anything from this list, outside of obviously some pretty key and notable names that could be drafted by the Bengals, it seems like they've been doing due diligence. It doesn't seem like it. They have been doing due diligence on the vast majority of offensive linemen that are expected to go between rounds 2 and 3, maybe a couple guys that could go in round 1, and a lot of defensive linemen from even really all 3 of the first rounds. It seems if there are 2 positions that you can expect the Bengals to draft with 2 of their first 3 picks, be someone that can protect Joe Burrow and someone that can attack the opposing quarterback. And again, not all these names obviously will be Bengals. Maybe none of them will be Bengals. Whatever the case may be, that is where their focus has been, and it's always evident based off of who they end up meeting with before the draft and after the combine.
So, and again, when you look at the offensive linemen, there are a few names in there that are either kind of maybe a little bit of projects, but I mean, we did a profile on Ursary a while back as well, and that's one of the guys. Maybe he starts out at guard, gives immediate emergency tackle, and then develops down the road maybe as a starting tackle as Orlando Brown ages or something like that. So they are still looking to maximize roster versatility and maximize roster spots here. I want to talk about some folks may know I was tweeting out some stuff today. Early this morning, I was on an NFL media call with NFL Network analyst Daniel Jeremiah. So I want to talk just quickly about what he said about the Montana State quarterback in case people missed it. I thought that was kind of funny. Basically, he said he jokes that he would be the president of the Tommy Mellott fan club, and he sees him with immediate return kick punt return ability. And there was kind of some Julian Edelman comps thrown around in the conversation as well. So I thought that was kind of interesting. I've got some more another quote before as we go on through the show that of a question I specifically asked DJ that I want to share. But the that one is interesting to me because some people think he might be, the day 3 pick, kind of, what is he? What do you do immediately? How can he help you? But he could also be one of those picks that a coach makes and it makes him look like a freaking genius, right? Where it's just like, man, what a value guy. And he does a little bit of everything. And really what it comes down to, it's a baseball analogy, but it's a utility player, right? It just various roles, various niches and doing different things. So I thought that was kind of interesting because the Bengals had met with him, which was, I think, a little bit of a surprise there. So, but a lot of familiar names on there as well, particularly in the defensive line group. Norman Lott is a name that's been kicked around a lot. But like you said, I think it is very obvious that the Bengals will use a pick on the defensive line, at least one on the defensive line and offensive line within their first 3 picks. That's where if we're reading the tea leaves here.
Believe it or not, there are some Montana State fans who are Bengals fans, and I did a video describing Tommy Mellott, and I got corrected because I called him Tommy Mellott, and his name is actually Tommy Mellott.
Oh, it's Mellott? Oh, so
yeah,
I'm wrong. Okay.
So I do know that. Jonah Savanaia, I think is the actual pronunciation of Jonah Savanaia from Arizona. But yeah, Mellott is interesting because he's 6 foot 200. He's basically the size of Jamar Chase. He runs a 4.39. I think that was his fastest 40 for his pro day. He ran the ball 487 times and threw the ball 686 times in his career there. And obviously that ratio was what it was because he was just so much more athletic than any other defender that he went up against. He just dominated at the FCS level. He was the first Montana State player to ever win the FCS Walter Payton Offensive Player of the Year. So that was pretty big. And yeah, originally I thought he was a name that they could look at after the draft, but it seems like there is a lot of interest around the league in him, and he may not even leave the 6th or 7th round at that point. The Bengals obviously only have 1 6th round pick, but yeah, it wouldn't be the most shocking thing in the world for the Bengals to draft a wide receiver really late on day 3 to kind of add to the back of that room. And with Mellott having worked out as both a punt returner and a wide receiver, someone that a team can develop. And obviously with the Bengals situation, you have so much, star power and depth at the top of the depth chart at the position, you can afford to take a chance on a guy like Mallett who would have to transition into that role, but obviously extremely athletic, and that's where he's going to win and last in the NFL if he does last in the NFL.
Yeah, be a fun player, kind of a late lottery ticket type of player. Our buddy Johnny, who does a lot of cool work on X, says kick return is a sneaky need with the uncertainty of Burton. I thought that was a good point. And I get it. Like the kick return stuff has been limited because of rule changes over the last handful of years, but you still are able to, pop an explosive play. You had that Charlie Jones return last year. That was a big catalyst for the team. And so, there's value there. It's obviously later value, but an intriguing player. But like you said, some big offensive linemen and some big defensive linemen, and that is it's relieving to me because the division being what it is and who resides in it, which teams reside in it, they need help, and it's good that they are saying we are. Again, reading the list here, we are going to be addressing the trenches early and or often.
100%. It was actually really funny. The last name on this list, Emory Jones Jr., he wasn't officially reported as a visit, but then Orlando Brown Jr. went on. He went on Chris Simms's show on NBC Sports, and he incidentally revealed that Emory Jones had a top 30 or had a 30 visit on the last day that 30 visits could be conducted, which was this past Wednesday, which is why we're going through this now. In all odds, like we're not going to hear about any other visits up until the NFL draft. So this is the list as of now. A handful of these guys are local visits, including all the Ohio State players, along with Caleb Johnson, who grew up and played high school at Hamilton, Ohio, which is about 40 minutes north of downtown, and he went to Iowa to play running back. So, I mean, that was the other thing, like there was a handful of running backs, and I think they took advantage of the fact that all those running backs were local visits, and I think that's an interesting strategy that the Bengals could deploy there because it is such a deep running back class, and they definitely want to take advantage of the depth there. But if the situation does come around where every team is thinking that they can grab a decent player in like the 4th or the 5th round, maybe that does lead to guys like a Judkins or a Johnson dropping into the 3rd round. And if that's the case, maybe that presents itself to be the best value pick that the Bengals could make. We know they're going to draft, or they're going to try to draft a running back at least at some point. So that could be an alternative option. That's why I think they met with a handful of those running backs. But again, by the time the 3rd round ends, which is about a week from now, there's more than likely going to be an offensive lineman and a defensive lineman that have joined the Cincinnati Bengals.
Yeah. So thanks for the rundown there, John. A big list there. And we're going to get to the wheel of offensive linemen here in a few minutes. And I want to preface that with a couple more comments. And I think you share this sentiment. I have the utmost respect for Daniel Jeremiah as an analyst and, media personality. And he's a gracious guy, very knowledgeable. So I just wanted to share a couple of other nuggets with some things as we transition into the wheel of offensive linemen and a mock draft. One of which this was not my question to him. I believe it was actually a Cardinals reporter that had asked this, if I'm not mistaken, but Jeremiah, and this is what kind of concerns me a little bit with some of the names on that list, John. Jeremiah said, I think the Cardinals are picking 42, if I'm not mistaken, in the 2nd round. Jeremiah kind of said, basically in that range, in the 40s, 42, that sort of thing, there are offensive linemen that, you're not necessarily going to love, right? There are guys, particularly tackles, offensive tackles, that you're just not really going to love. There might be some projects, there might be some flex players, that sort of thing. So, I think that's something to kind of keep in mind. I think the offensive line, oddly enough, is in a bit of a better state than the defensive line for the Bengals as of this point, but both of them kind of have their question marks at this point. So, we'll see if that's where the Bengals pounce, but I thought that was an interesting statement. And then I want to share, because for whatever reason, he gave me a really great and long answer. I kind of had a 2-parter, maybe that's why, but I wanted to share my question, if you would indulge me, John, just because, and it's not offensive line. I know that's kind of where we're going next with the wheel, but with the mock draft we're going to be doing, I thought this was maybe pertinent. There were questions already asked in front of me about Walter Nolan and Omarion Hampton and other things I was thinking about asking him. So I had asked him a couple of players or some things from a Bengals perspective. Number one, Jihad Campbell, where do you see him going given some of the injury stuff and whatnot going on and his potential fit with the Bengals? And then maybe can you give me a couple of day two safeties that you think would be good fits for the Bengals as they try and rebuild the defense? And he said, yeah, to me, it's an all defensive draft. You have to go on that side of the ball, heavy, heavy, heavy. I would be shocked if they don't do that. Jihad Campbell, I love. I know he's physically beat up coming into the process. So you have to have your medical group be comfortable there that he's going to be fine. And once we get into the season, to me, again, Campbell, he's dynamic. He's versatile off the ball, on the ball, big time speed for a team that's going to be playing against Baltimore and trying to climb that mountain every year. I think he matches up very well with them. When you think about somebody who can come downhill and get Derrick Henry on the ground, you could spy him against Lamar Jackson, and he can close down and try and suck him up on the perimeter as he, maybe does some runs off to the side. And then if you want to, you can let him rush off the edge. So he can do a lot of different things. I think he would be a heck of a pick there if he were to get to pick number 17. In terms of safeties on day two, a couple of interesting guys. Kevin Winston from Penn State, not a guy we've talked a lot about. Kevin Winston from Penn State I like. I think there's value because he missed time with only playing 2 games this year. But you get a nice package of height, weight, speed. He's aggressive. He's good versus the run. You go back to the 2023 tape, there's a lot to like about him. That would be one. One of my personal favorites is I kind of have him in that 3rd round range. Maybe teams think he's more so in that 4 or 5 range. I'm a Craig Woodson guy from Cal. I love him. I think he's a day one starter. He's 6 foot, 200 pounds, ran 4.45. He's smart, a great leader. He's a little older. He's played a ton of football, though. Smooth mover. He's an excellent tackler. He gets his hands on the football. Cal has also been a sneaky safety factory. That's one I kind of like, a little bit below that tier. And then Andrew Makuba from Texas is another good one who takes the ball away. Not the biggest guy in the world, but really, really good ball skills and takes it away. So cool answer. He gave me a lot there. Your thoughts on some of that stuff based on the defensive stuff, the defensive side of the ball that I asked Jeremiah and his answers there.
Very rarely do I think a linebacker is like worth a top 20 pick, but a fully healthy Jihad Campbell is worth it. Like, I think everything kind of speaks to him being a really good player. At the very least, he'll be a solid starter. And I've made my thoughts known on like how we look at potential when it comes to draft prospects. And I think a lot of it is kind of archaic and outdated, but he has legitimate, like, great potential. And for a 5-star recruit who played along the defensive line when he first got to Alabama, he like transitioned to linebacker very late in high school, but he was still recruited as an edge. And then he transitioned to linebacker, I think at the end of his first year at Bama. And he was really only like a 1-year starter there. And he was just he was such a natural fit. He was calling out plays before they even happened. He's so adept in coverage, and he's equally as physical against the run and taking on blocks. He's not just a guy that would fit in the AFC North. He's a guy that would fit in with any defense, and any defense that needs a linebacker. Jihad Campbell's the best in this class. It's just the fact that he has this knee scope from 2 years ago. He's got the partially torn labrum that can sometimes, come back to haunt guys as their careers progress. I don't know what the state of his medical is, and because of that, I am cautious to use a 1st-round pick on him. But if he had a clean bill of health, he's one of the 5 or 10 best players in this class. And at 17, that's a phenomenal value. But I do know that Kevin Winston does check a lot of boxes for the Bengals at safety, and in a class where I think it's a decent safety class for sure. And I think Jeremiah was on the right track with him. If he had played a full year in 24, he probably doesn't leave the 2nd round. He maybe even slip into the 1st because, like there's Malachi Starks and Nicky Manwari, who the Bengals both have interest in, and there's kind of a drop off in terms to the next safety. Maybe Xavier Watts is the next guy off the board. Maybe he's obviously connected to the Bengals being a Notre Dame guy, but I think Winston's firmly safety number 4, and I think his draft projection is interesting because he may not last until the Bengals' 3rd-round pick. So the Bengals wanted, they may have to take him in the 2nd round.
Yeah, interesting player, and like you said about Campbell, I loved Jeremiah's specific perspective against Baltimore and what he envisions him to be able to do as a defensive player for the Bengals. You just get scared off of the fact that it's I think likely at this point that you're not having him for at least the early portion of the season, right? Because of that labrum issue. And when you're talking about needing immediate defensive impact, it's hard to wrap your arms fully around using a first round pick. But I mean, like you said, he has star status written all over him for sure. And an interesting player. I'm very intrigued to see where he goes if the Bengals will pounce. And, the other caveat to that is, okay, you would immediately say, okay, you draft Jihad Campbell, and then maybe if there is still some discontent with Jermaine Pratt and the Bengals, that sort of thing, maybe you then do the trade situation. But if you have a guy who isn't available for the first part of the year, do you risk that as well? I mean, is that even something that comes to your mind there? I don't know. But interesting stuff from Daniel Jeremiah. I wanted to share a couple of little tidbits that I thought were really, really neat. And I've got a few more tweets. Talked a lot about tight ends. He had the top two being basically top 7 players in the class. So, Loveland's a really, really interesting guy. So anyway, I wanted to share that. I hope the listeners got a little bit of a kick out of that. We are going to transition to the Wheel of Offensive Linemen. And John, again, because we don't trust my production skills, John again was spearheading this one. You had like 18 or 20 names of the defensive linemen last time, right?
Yeah, I think we're about the same this time around as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
And last one was titled Give Trey Help. And this one now is in all caps, Guard Burrow. So run us through how many you got here and who's on here.
I think we're at about 17, 18. I actually didn't count fully. I tried to make it about equal to what we had for defensive linemen last time. But this list includes offensive linemen that could be drafted in the 3rd, maybe even the 4th round. Like, I don't think we know for sure when the Bengals would take an offensive lineman. I think they would want to take one in round 2 or at the latest round 3, but maybe there's a scenario where they go to round 4. So I included a handful of names that could be in that range as well.
Okay. You gonna kick it off for us?
Let's go ahead and spin that wheel. And name number 1 is gonna be Ozzy Trapillo, I believe. Nope. False alarm. The only center on this list, Jared Wilson from Georgia.
Jared, go for it.
Yeah, Jared Wilson from Georgia. There's been some talk about him potentially even going into the 1st round because outside of Gray Zabel, who I just realized is not even on this list, and that was a glaring omission on my part. In fact, I'm going to add him to the list now that I think about it. So
look at you.
This is a great way to just adjust and correct something that shouldn't have been corrected in the first place. Yeah. Jared Wilson, though, is probably the 2nd best center in this class behind Gray Zabel from Georgia, one of the best athletes overall in this class, a part of a really strong and stout interior offensive line for Georgia. So much has been said about how that program trains players, develops players, specifically on the offensive line. We heard a lot about it with Marius Mims last year, but the practices at Georgia are typically tougher than the actual games. Like they train those guys in practices throughout the week. So then when the games come on, it's just relatively easy. And that's typically what you see in terms of production profiles for these Georgia offensive linemen. And when Jared Wilson, who is really stout in pass protection, but can also get after it in the run game, he can move out of his stance. He can get out to the second level. There's not a lot of bad things about Jared Wilson. And I think he's been kind of lost in the shuffle for this offensive line class because either from prospect fatigue or the fact that he's not the biggest guy, he doesn't have the greatest length at the position, but high-end athlete who can definitely hold his own at the point of attack would be a very solid day 2 pick. And I think for the Bengals, it's not out of the question that they could draft a guy like Wilson to maybe take Ted Karras' spot next year, but I think he also has the body and the ability to play either guard spot. And I think if they view him as having that positional versatility, he could be one of these backup plans in the 2nd round if their guard tackle type is not available to them.
That's what I was going to start with is, the potential of playing guard and center. An early RAS score for Jared Wilson was a 9.98. The height being a little shorter, weight at 310 was good. The speed grade, he didn't do the other agility testing, the cone stuff, but the explosion grade elite, the composite speed grade elite, courtesy of Kentley Platt, aka Math Bomb. a 4 point. I think it was like 4.84 was the 40. So moves really well. And a guy, again, if you think he can give you positional versatility and do what we talked about with Ursary and others, where you start out as a guard and then, as one of your entrenched starters maybe ages out of playing, that's your heir apparent for his primary position at Georgia. And I swear you must have been on that call with me with Daniel Jeremiah, because he specifically said that about Georgia today and their practices. And he's like, I love Georgia players. They come in with an intensity. Sometimes they come in a little bit more beat up than because of the practices in the conference they play in, but they are ready to play. They play in NFL schemes, et cetera, et cetera. So this is, this, again, not a name that we've talked about a ton, but if that pick was made and made relatively early, I think it would make a lot of sense for this team. And that the Bengals love those Georgia Bulldogs. He is a junior. He is younger, 21, I believe. I don't have his exact birth date in front of me. I don't know.
Turns 22 in June.
Okay. So yeah, still on the younger side. And like I said, the RAS was outstanding. There are some, like you said, arm size concerns a little bit, but the athleticism is there. And I think he could potentially be groomed into a really solid player. And then we talked about this with Tate Ratledge, John, just that connection with Amarius Mims and playing with Amarius Mims at Georgia, having some semblance of continuity from college to pro. That's also just an additional perk.
Bengals also met with him at the Combine. They had both Dan Pitcher and Scott Peters, the offensive line coach, down for Georgia's Pro Day to observe some of these offensive linemen. So he's obviously not the only one on this wheel. He's not the only one in consideration, but yeah, a lot of those things make sense. And it wouldn't be too shocking, because his floor, even as a 1-year starter at Georgia, is very high. And I think NFL teams are really high on him. So let's go ahead, spin the wheel again, this time with Gray Zabel included. We'll see if we get him. There we go. Wyatt Milam.
Wyatt Milam, huh? This guy is another guy that I don't think we've really talked about him too much in the pre-draft process, John. But a guy I think also may intrigue the Bengals to some degree. What do you think about his scheme fit with the Bengals? How do you feel about him? I mean, coming out of West Virginia, he is a senior. I think he's a little bit older, 6'6 and a half, 313, 32 and 1/8 inch arms, 10 and a quarter inch hands, slower on the 40, 5.27. What do you think about this guy and his fit with the Bengals?
I think it's interesting because he only played tackle there. He played a little bit of right tackle, but mostly left tackle to finish his career, and very solid against, Big 12 defensive lineman, which is not always so indicative of future success in the NFL. But the fact that he's 6'6" and he kind of bends at the waist, if you were to move him inside to guard, I feel like maybe that wouldn't necessarily be the best thing for him.
Wasted potential, yeah.
But also at the same time, his wingspan is only 80 inches, arm length is under 33 inches. So he doesn't have the length that teams would love to have a guy out on the edge. So he's kind of I don't want to say he's an offensive lineman without a certified home in terms of a position, but I think it would take him a little bit to transition into guard, despite the fact that he loves to just bury guys into the dirt. He's a finisher through and through, and he's got enough foot speed, I think, to kind of mirror guys. Even if you were to put him inside, the quickest 3 techniques, I don't think would be able to cross his face or whatnot. But I think there would be some issues that we've kind of seen with Cordell Volson, where his pad level kind of gets the better of him and guys can get under him. So that would be something that they would have to consider if they were to move him inside to guard. But I think in the Bengals scheme specifically, where you get the ball up really quickly, if you were to leave him outside at tackle for some of those, quick dropbacks and quick true pass sets, he would be fine. So the production was good. He didn't give up a lot of pressures and sacks and anything like that over the course of his career, and he's a good enough athlete. So those guys typically end up having solid careers. I just think with the Bengals, if they were to move him inside the guard, there's a little bit of projection there, specifically with his body type.
Yeah, that's the thing that concerns me, and likely probably some other teams, is just that tweener style, right? He's kind of shorter arms, like you meant. Big guy, looks the part, just coming off the bus type of thing as an NFL tackle, but shorter arms and everything, but like you said, bends well and moves pretty decently. It's like he's got some tackle skills, but some projection at guard. So it's kind of this in between in limbo with him. He had a decent RAS score. I think it was around the 7.85 range. Graded out as good and okay in most of the areas, with the vertical and the broad, et cetera, et cetera. Like I said, it was okay in the 40-yard dash, 5.27. So, not the most exceptional athlete in terms of testing, but a big guy. There's tools to work with. It's more, I don't, I just don't know what would stunt his development and what would be the best path forward for him. Like you said, I don't know if there's that guard to tackle eventual ascension. I don't know if it's guard only. I don't know if it's emergency tackle and then groom him to just be a tackle because, like you said, that's primarily where he played at West Virginia. So I have some concerns, but there are a lot of things to like. And like you said, the nastiness, the finishing, the physicality of him, it seems to be, the consensus descriptors of him.
Yeah, not one of the guys that they've met with in this pre-draft process. But again, if you're in a situation where you haven't drafted an offensive lineman in the first 2 rounds, I think he could be one of those guys that falls under the radar just because there's uncertainty as to where he'll play. So he could be in consideration for round 3. Speaking of 3, third wheel to spin. Here we go. Third spin of the wheel, excuse me. Oh, I definitely want to talk about this guy.
Go for it.
Jalen Rivers, offensive lineman from Miami. One of the more interesting guys that I've researched. He took a 30 visit with the Bengals within the last week. Someone that draft guy Jared, who's a definite should follow for anyone who's on Twitter for Bengals offensive and defensive linemen, really loves Jalen Rivers. And I was a fan of him as well. I think he is a big-bodied guy who doesn't have the quickest feet, and he's played mostly tackle in college, even though he was, I think, recruited. No, he was recruited. I'll have to double check that. He was either recruited as a guard or a tackle. The thing is, though, his last year in Miami, he dealt with a lot of injuries in the early parts of his career at Miami. So his development, I think, was stunted a little bit. But this past year, when Miami was in the spotlight with Cam Ward, leading Miami to almost a college football playoff berth, now is going to be the first overall pick. Jalen Rivers played both left guard and left tackle, not every other game. He played both positions in the same game for like the last 7 games of the season. He dealt with an injury early in the season, and then he came back, and there were some drives where he was at left tackle, and there were some drives he was at left guard. I think he ended up playing both positions almost equally throughout his entire college career. That again was, kind of stunted with a lot of injuries and everything. He was recruited as an offensive tackle, by the way, but he started out his career at guard. That's what I forgot to mention. He started off his career at left guard, then he moved to left tackle where he was originally supposed to play. And then he was going through these games playing 2 positions at the same time. I don't know what the rotation deal was, but it was something that was inspired by the coaching staff, and they kind of trained him to do that. And he now comes to the NFL with this rare case of actual in-game versatility, which is insane to think about, considering like it would be something that would, prohibit a guy from reaching his full potential. But he was able to manage it really well, and he wasn't overwhelmed in some of these games, and he lasted against really good competition with it. So a really powerful guy. Again, not the best athlete, but I think for schematically for what the Bengals like to do in the run game, I think he would fit just fine as left guard. Just stick him there. Don't have him worry about going on the edge and back inside. I think the Bengals would absolutely love the ability to be versatile and the willingness to be versatile in a very unconventional type of way.
Latest RAS has him at 6.48. The arm length is 34.88. So take that for what you will. And good in the size grade. Didn't qualify in the explosion grade. Didn't do any agility testing, the cone drills. Okay speed grades between the splits and the 40-yard dash. Father, Keith Rivers. Not that Keith Rivers, though. A different Keith Rivers. And this is something, again, and kudos to many members of his family, Mr. Keith Rivers and Mrs. Donna Daniels, his stepfather, James Daniels. They all served in the Navy. So I don't know if and how and why this may play into Zach Taylor's, character thing and or maturity. But you have to kind of figure he grew up in a home that had some semblance of pretty solid discipline with a household full of military folks. That's kind of the thing that comes with that. So you like that, but a very, I I like this guy. Again, I'm not in love with the athletic profile. If we're going to take, I don't like to take that as absolute scripture, but you know, there's metrics there to look at, but also, as you said, played a number of, a couple different positions, sometimes in the same game. He was 2023 second team all ACC, honorable mention last year because of the injuries. You had to figure he was probably going to get some sort of more high profile nod than that. Had he played most, if not all of the season. But you also have to always look at top offensive linemen from a program that not only had an excellent quarterback who's very likely going to be the top pick in the draft, but John, some that even with Joe Burrow, some that like to ad-lib, move around the pocket. You have to withstand protection sometimes longer than when you're protecting for other quarterbacks, and or if the quarterback's moving or things are moving upfield, kind of disengage the current block, move upfield and get another block in down the field. And so that's something that I find intriguing about this guy is when you are a starting and well-decorated offensive lineman coming out of a program where you were tasked with protecting a dynamic quarterback, that's what really says, hey, this guy can keep up in a lot of different respects at the next level.
I like that point. I like that a lot. I think that does lead to an easier transition in terms of playing style and the awareness to just not give up on some of these plays. So there is that experience there. And he was a team captain these past couple games in the season. So I think that kind of leads to his background. But again, I think you're talking about a player who is really stout in pass protection. He kind of makes it look easy. He is a little bit tall. He's 6'6", but he's got really long arms, really big wingspan. Mm-hmm. So he could probably live at either spot. But I think the pad level stuff doesn't get him into trouble as much as it does for a guy like Milam. And that shows up on film. So another guy that I think if the Bengals are in that disastrous scenario where they're entering round 3 without an offensive lineman, he may be someone that's projected to go round 4, but it wouldn't shock me at all if they were to take this guy in round 3. So we'll have to see something about that. So I'm going to adjust my microphone because it's all over my head. But we are now onto the 4th spin of the wheel. Donovan Jackson from Ohio State. Take it away, AC.
Donovan Jackson. A lot of people know this guy from the Ohio State, right? 22 years old and a guy that should be hearing his name called probably relatively early, I would think. And obviously comes from the big program. A little bit of the same thing with the playing in a dynamic offense, that sort of thing. 6'4", 315, 33.5-inch arms, 9 7/8 with the hand size, and second team All Big Ten. Started at left guard. First team All Big Ten. That was 22. Second team All Big Ten. First team All Big Ten. Started all 13 games at left guard, and then 24 is really where people and scouts may become kind of captivated with him, not only because of the recognition, but that's where the flexibility came. He played 5 games at left guard and 9 at left tackle to replace Josh Simmons. He was a second team All-American, first team All Big Ten. So obviously comes very well decorated. He's a strong guy and comes from a big program that, put up a lot of points and the offense imposed its will. He's barrel chested. He's just a big dude. And I think there's a lot to like with this guy. I don't have his RAS pulled up right now. I'll look for that in just a second. But, again, a guy that he gets his hands on you. He's likely to stay on you. He's strong enough to withstand bull rushes, and he's a big guy from a big program. Checks a lot of boxes for the Bengals.
Our friend, good friend of the program, Joe Goodberry, oftentimes when he looks at players like this, he'll describe them as condors because he's a nerd like that. And I think that I think that definitely applies here. He kind of reminds me, of like a longer Isaiah Wynn, who's got even more power. Isaiah Wynn, if you remember from like 2018, was this guard tackle type from Georgia, who was a little bit on the shorter side. He was, I think, 6'2". Jackson is 6'3", maybe rounds up to 6'4", because that's what we do here. But a guy that started at left guard, he was the top interior offensive lineman recruit in the class of 2021 from Texas. Every year I do an article about prospects that are linked to either Cincinnati or the Bengals. His mom grew up in Cincinnati and met his dad at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. They're both from Ohio, and then they moved to Texas and they raised Donovan. But Donovan landed on Ohio State in the recruiting process because of his connection already to Ohio. So that he chose to live here close to Cincinnati. I think he would definitely not mind if he ended up playing in the NFL for where his mom ended up growing up. So that's a unique connection for an Ohio State guy. Not the best athlete, but I think he surprised a lot of people for how well he adapted to left tackle for the best team in the country. And there was, I think, one game, against Penn State, Abdul Carter got the best of him. That was literally his first start at left tackle, so naturally it wasn't going to go too well. But he settled in, and eventually I think he confirmed to a lot of people that like this guy is legitimately talented. He may have not have dominated the way that you would have expected the top ranked recruit at his position at one of the best schools in the country, but I think him showing that he can last at an even tougher position, I think it elevated the opinion of him to a place where you're like, yeah, this guy is legit and he's putting all this talent together. And I think that's why in all likelihood he's probably going to go off the board before the Bengals second round pick. But if he's there, having that guard tackle versatility, having like all the intangibles, one of the smartest guys on the team, his GPA was like 3.9, a leader for that team, for the positional versatility, again, the experience at a big program against really quality opponents in big games, all those boxes are checked. Like this guy makes so much sense for 49, which is of course why he's probably not going to be there.
Yeah, he might not be there, but looking at his RAS profile, it's pretty good. It's 8.99. But where he really shines again is strength and explosion. And for an interior offensive lineman, that points to good things. He had 32 bench reps. He had a 32.5-inch vertical, and then a broad of 8.11. So great score on the explosion grade and a really nice bench press. So again, we talked about it when we first started talking about him. It's strength and it's an explosive guy. Didn't test in some other areas, and that's, that leaves a little bit of a question mark. But I like you said, he would make a lot of sense had they gone defensive line or defensive side of the ball in the first round, and they really want to address the trenches. If he's there at 49, it would make a lot of sense.
100%. Do we have time for one more spin? We got 14 names left, so let's make this one count.
All right.
Okay, someone that we covered with the draft profile a while back, but Ariante Ursary, another second-round prospect. What do you got, AC?
Yeah, big guy, and one of those. Again, is he? Do you start him at guard and then groom him for tackle? Is he a guard only? Is he your emergency tackle and just the grooming kind of continues to go to tackle? Big guy. I think the Bengals did meet with him. We talked about it earlier, so there's some interest there. A decorated guy. I think he's a little bit older, if I'm not mistaken. I have to pull that up, but a guy that comes from not the biggest of programs. He was kind of the big fish in the small pond at Minnesota there, but I think there are a lot of tools. There's a lot of size that the Bengals would like from this guy. It's more, what's the plan? And again, you're hoping with 6 picks and this championship window, starting to kind of get a little wavering a little bit, you kind of want your early picks to contribute right away. And it would seem that the best way for him to do that would be potentially supplanting Cordell Volson at left guard if they wanted to do that, and then eventually grooming him for tackle.
100%. Someone really experienced in the Big Ten at left tackle, but even despite being 6'6", 330 pounds, 33-inch arms, 80-inch wingspan, those are measurements that a lot of teams just point to guard. And I think that's why he was brought in for a visit, someone that could potentially make that transition while also having, obviously, the ability to kick out to tackle. And that has just been a theme for a lot of these visits. Guys who play tackle primarily because they were the best offensive lineman on their team. And that's kind of how a lot of these transitions go. Some of the best guards in the NFL, they were college tackles. So it is a projection when you're moving guys like Ursary inside. And I don't have any worries about his athleticism. I think that's the best part about his game. I think he can get to the second level very easily. He can mirror guys in pass protection, and he does have enough length to keep guys at bay. The ability to kind of roll his hips into his blocks and really just generate movement in a downhill scheme, I think that can lead to some issues. I think a lot like Kelvin Banks Jr., who we didn't cover today, he would be a first-round prospect. I think both of these guys are like best fit as offensive linemen in wide zone schemes, which is not what the Bengals like to run. So there is a projection, I think, with how he would fit schematically, but all the tools are there. And if Scott Peters thinks that he can adapt to his style of pass protection with his techniques, then there's something to work with there, because there's a lot of athleticism, and the more athletes you have along the offensive line, the more stuff you can do.
Yeah, early RAS score was at 9.89 unofficial, 6'6", 331. Like I said, big boy. But for that size, running at right around 5 flat in the 40-yard dash, that's pretty impressive. He had an elite speed grade per RAS and a great explosion grade. Like you said, a pretty solid athlete. I would be curious, and I don't know if it's out there. I'd be curious to see if he plugged those numbers into a guard, right? How those would come out that way. But again, a big guy. The Bengals have shown some interest. Schematically, questions, but the versatility potential is there that the Bengals may like.
Absolutely, but that is another edition of the Wheel.
The Wheel. We got one repeat on that one. That's okay. We already had. It saves us work on the splicing of, it's like Nolan last time. It saves us a little bit of work. That's all right. Okay, so that is the Wheel of Offensive Linemen. We may break that out one more time next week before the draft. We'll see. Maybe we do that and the defensive lineman again. We'll see. But at any rate, we are going to do a mock draft, and we're going to do only 3 rounds just for the sake of time, because we're coming up on close to an hour here. And I think what we're going to do, we did this last year. John and I are going to make our own picks. Sometimes we've done the consensus. Yeah, let's pick this guy, that sort of thing. We're going to make our own picks and come up. They may overlap still, but we're going to come up with our own picks and come up with 3. So what's your approach going into this? Is this what John Sheeran would do? Is this based on Bengals history and that sort of thing? Is it a blend of all kinds of different things? How are you approaching this, John?
I'm going to make decisions based off of, I'm going to play in the bucket that I think the Bengals are interested in terms of players that I think they're interested in. And I'm going to make decisions based off of that for like what I would do. So like I'm limiting myself to a selection of players that I think the Bengals are interested in, or do I think they're interested in, and then based off of those players, I'm going to choose the best ones in my opinion.
Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna be a little more Bengal. Yeah, like you. I'm gonna be a little bit more through the eyes of the Bengal, not necessarily what Anthony would do. Though there are some players out there that I've got some favorites. So if they're around at value picks, I don't know. We'll see what we do here. We're gonna run through 3 rounds here, and maybe we'll do one more of these before the draft as well, kind of a final one. You did get it started. Okay.
Yeah, apologies for any ads or long load time. FanSpeak is a little bit overwhelmed in that regard, but this is the Joe Goodberry board, the Bengals board. I think it's very accurate in terms of where players are projected to go. And we're just going to quickly run through who has been picked. We got Cam Ward, Travis Hunter, Sanders, Armin Membo, Abdul Carter, Ashton Genty, Will Campbell, Michael Williams, Tyler Warren, Colston Loveland. This website is taking forever to load, and it is freezing, and I don't like that on live television. We are waiting to see if this actually loads and does stops buffering. I'm filibustering as much as I can. Shout out Corey Booker. Okay. Wow. Okay. Let's calm down here. Wow. Stop. Maybe. Okay. All right. Cool. Colston Loveland, Shamar Stewart, Jalen Walker, Josh Connerly Jr., Nick Emanwari, Donovan Ezeraku, Will Johnson are all off the board. So Anthony, we got Jahad Campbell. Mason Graham is still available. Personally, I'm not going to pick him because that's completely unrealistic. But Ted McMillan, Jahad Campbell, Matthew Golden, Kelvin Banks, Walter Nolan are amongst the best players available at this point.
So I just went on this whole spiel about Jihad Campbell, and I'm tempted to go there. I do think that the Bengals, and speaking of Nolan, he was brought up a couple of times in the Daniel Jeremiah call. He does still believe, despite whatever vague concerns are out there for him, that he will go in the teens to early 20s. So this fits right into that wheelhouse as well. I think the Bengals really, really like him. I think with a special player like Campbell, the Bengals may be tempted to pounce. The injury thing may scare them off. And despite their improvements as a staff, on the medical staff front, I don't know that I have the fullest confidence at this point in terms of, gauging all of that stuff. I really, really, really want to go Jihad Campbell, but I'm thinking if I'm the Bengals, they have been talking about 3 techs and interior pass rush for a long time and needing some assistance in that regard. So I do think I am going to go with Walter Nolan, though my heart is telling me Jihad Campbell.
I'm kind of with you. I think this comes down to Nolan or Harmon. As much as I think we like to think that the Bengals operate in best player available, I don't think that's always the case. I think they still look at specific needs in terms of where they need to address, where they think they need to address for a specific draft to just fill certain holes. I don't know what they think about Campbell, to be honest with you. I know that there hasn't been any reported meetings about him at the combine or top 30. Yeah. I don't know how aggressive they're going to be to draft a linebacker in this class. I know that they want to draft a linebacker. I don't know if they would take one in the first, and I just don't know what they feel about his medical. I think they've just shown very limited interest in really any linebacker in this class. So it is so much up in the air for me. I know that he's extremely popular. I know Zim is a big fan of him. I know that obviously a lot of people would want to take Jihad Campbell here, but I really don't know what they think about him. And I think without that knowledge, there's a giant question with his medical. What I do know is that they're interested in both Walter Nolan and Derek Harmon. Malachi Starks would be the other pivot that I would think would be in play here. They're interested in him as well, and even Worry is off the board. So I think that if Walter Nolan is here, he's the most likely to be picked. I think Campbell is an interesting variable, and again, he's going to be very popular, and I think he definitely fits a need. He's a great player, but I just don't know if he's actually in that bucket. It's the same thing with Kelvin Banks. They haven't met with him. I don't even know if they feel like he is a schematic fit at guard for what they want to do. So I think just based off of interest and based off of value and need and everything like that, Nolan is probably where I would go.
Okay. Again, that is, you said Mason Graham was up there, right?
Yeah, but that's
not going to happen. So we're operating on that, on that assumption. So we did separate drafts, but we picked the same guy right off the bat. All right.
Okay. Let's go on to round 2 in like a minute, whenever this loads. No. Ah! Stop.
Did it freeze?
No. But it made me click an ad. This is why I don't like doing live mock drafts. Please click to next round, please. I'm gonna make this awkward for everyone. I'm gonna make it so awkward that you're gonna have to skip ahead because I don't like dead air and I don't like when this happens. Okay, cool. Kelvin Banks somehow lasts the second round along with Gray Zabel. Josh Simmons, one of the first picks off the board in the second round with Tyleek Williams. Maxwell Harrison, who I think was invited to the NFL draft. Trayvon Henderson goes. Jackson Dart goes to the Saints. That is the likely pairing. Carson Schwarzenegger off the board. Nick Scourton. Donovan Jackson goes to the Cowboys, 44th overall. Trey Amos, who met with the Bengals, goes to the Indianapolis Colts. Mason Taylor is the pick right before the Bengals, along with TJ Sanders. So, best players available: Quinshon Judkins, running back out of Ohio State; Xavier Watts from the safety from Notre Dame; JT Tuimoloa from Ohio State; Benjamin Morrison from Notre Dame; Landon Jackson from Arkansas; Jonah Savanaia from Arizona State.
So that's probably the short list there that the Bengals would be looking at. I'm tempted to go with JT, but seeing as how they went with they went with defensive line in our first pick there. I don't know that they would double dip right there. I think for me, the Watts is the wild card. He's got the connection there and productive player. So that's a wild card for me. Do you go that way or do you go offensive line? I think just, again, reading the tea leaves of the visits that the Bengals have conducted of late, I'm going to go with the kid from Arizona State.
Arizona State?
No, not Arizona State. I'm sorry. I'm having a tough time seeing this, buddy. Let me see.
Savanaya from Arizona?
Yes. Sorry, I said Arizona State. Yes. That's probably where I would go. Ratledge would tempt me as well. Princely would tempt me. And like I said, JT would tempt me. Watts would tempt me. But I think they are just really committed on shoring up the trenches. So I'm going to go Savanaya, a guy that they've shown interest in the pre-draft process.
I do want to bring up this exact scenario because Savanaya and Tate Rutledge are still here. Xavier Watts is still here as well. There is definitely a scenario in which both of those guards are gone and the Bengals are left scrambling and Donovan Jackson's gone as well. And then they would have to take, or they would feel like they would have to take Xavier Watts. There's also the scenario that if some of these guards last and Xavier Watts is there, I have to imagine that Al Golden is going to be standing 10 toes down on whatever table he's sitting at and says, I need this guy to lead my defense. I don't want to deal with Geno Stone, a guy that I wasn't here when he was signed. I don't think that he's good enough to play the field safety role that Watts did for me for the last 2 years in Notre Dame. I think there's a potential for a conflict there in the war room between Watts and the best offensive lineman available. And I think for the most part, Golden's going to be outnumbered in bargaining for Watts, and maybe even more to the point, because if he had his pick for a defensive lineman in the first round, maybe they'd be like, hey, like, you already got your player. We need to protect Burrow. I think that is a point of potential contention in the war room, but for the sake of diversity here, I'm going to say if there are some guards available still, maybe some gets pushed down to round 3, I'm going to go ahead and take Watts here and give Al Golden the guy that I'm sure that he wants.
That's a fair point. Fair point.
And of course, Savanaya is the first pick afterwards, as well as Benjamin Watson, who goes to the Green Bay Packers. He's kind of a weird situation, Anthony, because man corners who deal with hip injuries, I think that can potentially lead him to dropping maybe further than expected. And that's also something that you have to watch for, because obviously that's another Notre Dame guy. Load times are better now, though. So now we're deep into round 3.
We're rolling. We are rolling.
Jalen Milroe goes to the Jets. That's interesting. Cameron Williams, Andrew Makuba, back-to-back Texas players. Jordan Birch is the pick right before the Bengals pick. So now we got some interior offensive lineman. Marcus Imbo from Purdue. Jack Sawyer made it to pick 81 for the Bengals. Wyatt Milam from West Virginia, we just went over him, along with Jared Wilson. Harold Fannin Jr., who still has a cult following, the tight end, leading receiver of the NCAA for Bowling Green. Jacob Parrish, one of my favorite cornerbacks in this draft from Kansas State. Ashton Gelati from Louisville are your top players available. Who is sticking out for you, Anthony?
Well, Sawyer's sticking out for sure. How do you feel about Ashton Gelati?
I think he's probably the best defensive end that they could draft in the 3rd round. Someone who can bend around the edge, but can also withstand power, has the size to last. I think rather with Jack Sawyer, you're dealing with some size limitations. He's not a 1-for-1 Sam Hubbard necessarily, but I think Gelati can provide a lot of value there in round 3.
Yeah, I've kind of got him higher potentially than Sawyer. And I think based on also what you just said there, which is a little bit of the opinion I started to kind of gain with Gelati, that's, that may be a little bit more of a preference from what they look for out of their edges, right? Just a little bit more of a well-rounded player potentially. So I think I'm going to go there. Shamar Turner is another one that's interesting. I would have gone potentially with Charles Grant had I not taken the guard previous to that. But yeah, that's where I'm going. Are you in agreement with that?
I would definitely consider Ashton right here. I think for me, because I haven't taken a guard, I'm going to force myself to take one. And luckily, there are a handful of options that I think are really worth this pick. I'm going to actually go ahead and look at the full list of players here. So like Marcus Embo would be in consideration. Milam would probably be in consideration. Charles Grant is someone that the Bengals met with for a 30 visit. And according to Brandon Thorne, he already utilizes, like William and Mary's coach utilized the strike system that Scott Peters implemented and started. So he already has familiarity with Peters' coaching style, as well as Dylan Fairchild from Georgia. Miles Frazier is another guy that should be in consideration here, and Jalen Rivers there as well. So in this scenario, there are still quality offensive linemen that lasted along with Jared Wilson, the center. I have no issue with Ashton Gelati, but because I didn't take an offensive lineman in the third round, I would probably go with this is tough. I would probably, me personally, I would lean to either Fairchild or Frazier. And I think the Bengals would probably be most interested in Fairchild, considering all their interest in Georgia players this year. The fact that there is some familiarity with what Peters likes to do. So Fairchild's going to be my pick, but for the sake of variety here, I'm going to put Gelati as the pick in the Sims. But Dylan Fairchild is going to be my pick.
All right.
And in this scenario, to be honest with you, like the third round is, I think, that inflection point where any offensive lineman that you draft is probably going to have to win a starting battle at probably left guard. And Fairchild, that's where he cut his teeth for Georgia. So I think in this scenario, at least from my perspective, it should be a place where you would be willing to call either Brandon Scherf or Dalton Reisner after the draft and said, hey, we still have an opening at the starting right guard spot. It's yours if you wanted. We're going to have a battle royale at the other spot, but we still have a vacancy there. And I think that is the scenario that could lead to them potentially reaching out to a veteran free agent at one of the guard spots. But again, it really all changes in the second round, honestly. If they go defense there and they haven't addressed offensive line, I think that opens the window. But if they land a guard, which is probably their preferred plan, I think that probably takes a guy like Scherf off the table.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm breaking it down in the chats, but did you see where Omarion Hampton, I don't know if you're able to go back and look or not, but I was just curious to see where he went.
So he's apparently, like, his floor right now is like 20th overall to the Denver Broncos. I don't think he went that early in this draft. He didn't go in the top 20. Let me check one more time. Ashton Jeanty went 6th overall to the Las Vegas Raiders. Omarion Hampton went 29th overall to the Washington Commanders.
Wow. Okay. And then you had Nolan. You had Watts, right?
And then I had Dylan Fairchild.
And Fairchild. Okay. All right. I think two pretty solid grabs by both of us 100%. Here. And I do think, again, with their devaluation of guard traditionally, you may be more accurate with your assessment of Al Golden pounding the table for his guy. And let's get maybe more of a true guard or one of those flex players that is viewed as a project. And that's maybe where they more lean at that point, and go guard a little later than we think. So that is our first mock draft. Hope maybe not our last, I don't know, but we are going to drop the mic and get on out of here. I've kind of slowly dropped the mic along the way with a lot of different stuff, be it Daniel Jeremiah quotes and or the letting people know that I will be covering the draft like I don't know. I'll look like an amateur compared to all these people that are out there, but hopefully we'll get some cool stuff for you out there. But what do you have for us on the way out, John?
Just a little bit of a kind of a personal remember when, not necessarily anything to do with a Bengals player or a moment with the team. But for me, 4 years ago, I was invited to formerly Paul Brown Stadium, now Paycor Stadium, signing an NDA agreement and meeting guys like Willie Lutz and Yasmin Quintana to see the reveal or behind the scenes reveal of the Bengals New Jerseys, which is still one of the more cooler opportunities that I've ever had doing this job, and writing a whole story about it, meeting Bengals Whitney as well, meeting a lot of really fun, creative people within the Bengals community that got a really exclusive chance to see jerseys that admittedly we first saw on eBay on a hanger, right? But I think the whole point of that meeting was to give, fans of the team and someone who covers the team a really exclusive opportunity to meet Elizabeth Blackburn as well, to get inside on the whole process and to have an experience that's really unique compared to what a lot of the fan base has been privy to. So that was a really cool experience that happened almost exactly 4 years ago to this date. One of my favorite articles that ever wrote for CincyJungle.com. But yeah, that was just something I was thinking about considering what the day was.
I still hate you for that, by the way. I'm kidding. No, that was a really cool. It wasn't Zim there also. I think Zim was with you. Yeah. So really cool experience for you that you got to get, but yeah. And obviously a new era of football spawned with those new jerseys. So very cool. That's going to do it for us on the Orange and Black Insider, presented in part by FOCO, the fans only company. Go check out all the cool things that they have at foco.com and the Bengals selection, be it bobbleheads or whatever. Go check out. They've got you covered with a lot of unique things. Go check that out and tell them we sent you. Got to go get the Believe in Cincy podcast channel through your favorite audio streamer. Subscribe to that. You have to resubscribe to that channel. The old channel is defunct at this point, but you can still get all the shows that we've been bringing you for quite some time. Matt and Willie No Ball with the coach Matt Minnick and Willie Lutz, the aforementioned Willie Lutz, and our show, the Orange and Black Insider, 3 and Out with Jason and Kevin, and Talking Football with Bengal Jim and friends. Yes, happy Easter to all if you are celebrating that or anything else this weekend. Have fun with family, friends, be safe, have fun, and watch the kiddos go out and have some fun collecting those Easter eggs from the bunny that comes and visits. I think the bunny's coming for a big visit. I'm hearing for our children. So actually during the show, my neighbor popped in. I think he gave my kids a little Easter gift, which was very, very nice. So I have to go properly thank him. But that's very sweet. Anyway, that's going to do it for us. Happy Easter, everybody. We'll be back with a lot more next week, not only as a standalone show, but you'll be seeing me in Cheesehead Land. So we'll have to see what goes on there. Thanks, everybody. John, you take care, buddy. Have a good holiday weekend coming up here.
You as well.
All right.